Welcome to Best Ball 102. If you haven't checked out Best Ball 101, be sure to check out on the Fanspeak Network. It covers the very basics of best ball. But if you want to take your next step with best ball this summer, this is Best Ball 102, where we talk about a little bit more detailed strategies. But first, let's talk about what did we cover in Best Ball 101. Super quick, we talked about on the different sites, which you can draft on Underdog Fantasy, DraftKings, and Drafters are the three main sites to draft best ball drafts. And on those sites, they each have the same positional starting roster. And that means a starting roster means it's best ball. So the best ball means the best scores each week on your team will get filled into these starting positions. Again, on Underdog, you draft 18 rounds. On DraftKings and Drafters, you draft 20 rounds or 20 positions. So of those, let's say 18 players on Underdog, it'll fill out on its own each week. It's set it and forget it. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 flex. So again, that's the starting roster. And again, we talked about basics of stacking. For whether you draft 2 quarterbacks or 3 quarterbacks, you always want to try to stack your quarterback with at least 1 player on their team, either a running back, receiver, or tight end. I'm fine with any position. Obviously, receiver is usually the first target, but no more than 3 other players. So team stacks are usually anywhere from 2 to 4 players. That's the sweet spot. You don't want any more than that, or then it's over stacking essentially. So keep that in mind for team stacking, keep that in mind for stacking your quarterbacks. Again, whether you draft 2 or 3, always stack them with at least 1 pass catcher. But I like stacking a quarterback, receiver, running back, or quarterback, receiver, tight end, mixing in the running back and tight end. Also, be open to doing team stacks even without the quarterback. So say you stack your quarterbacks, great. Stack up other good offenses. Just look to target good offenses, especially on Underdog Fantasy, where we are using FanDuel scoring essentially, and half-point PPR, no bonuses. It's touchdown hunting. So who scores touchdowns? Good offenses. We are stacking up good offenses. So I think that covers it for the kind of the recap. Before we get started, if you are new to Underdog or Drafters, be sure to use code Fanspeak. You'll get 100% deposit bonus up to $100. So deposit 100, get 100, and have $200 in drafts this summer. That's something that will give you a nice start in the best ball landscape. But let's go further down, in talking about more strategies here now in Best Ball 102. So in Best Ball 102, I want to talk about, positional capital, what you want to allocate to each position. And then also different lineup construction. So we kind of talked about it last week that if you, whether it's Underdog or DraftKings or Drafters, you're looking to draft 2 to 3 quarterbacks, 4 to 7 running backs, 7 to 9 receivers, 2 to 3 tight ends. So again, keep that in mind as you are drafting. But the whole thing with positional capital is you either want to spend, high amount, meaning a high draft pick, or a higher quantity. You don't want to do both. So that would be, you don't want to draft 3 quarterbacks in the top end of your draft, or you don't want to draft, 9 or 10 receivers and they're all at the top of your draft. If you're going to draft top receivers, then you might be on the lower side, more like 7 receivers. If you want to draft running backs high, you might be on the lower side of that, like 5 running backs. The extreme is 4. That's what they call hyper fragile running back. We'll get into different strategies here in a second, but you don't want to do both. You either want to draft kind of quality or quantity, and kind of the sweet spot is a little bit of both, but let's talk about the different strategies that you'll hear people talk about. First of all, you'll hear people talk about hero quarterback or hero tight end. That just means the top quarterbacks and tight ends on the board. Obviously, the top 3 quarterbacks are not now going around round 3, and that, of course, is Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts. And of course, the top tight end is Travis Kelce. He's the only one going round 1. You could still consider like a Mark Andrews, a hero tight end, or even, a little bit lower down. Then you've got like the, Kittle, Hawkinson, that range as well. But that's what people talk about when they draft a hero quarterback, hero tight end. Sometimes what that means is if you draft a hero quarterback or hero tight end, then you can draft less of them, meaning So if I draft Kelsey, I'm assuming he's going to fill out my starting roster tight end spot each week. So I may only draft 2 tight ends as opposed to 3. In quarterbacks, if I draft one of the hero quarterbacks, I may only draft 2 quarterbacks as opposed to 3, because again, I spent high draft capital. Now there is merit, and I do like drafting 3 quarterbacks. If I draft, of course, further down the board, I'd always draft 3 quarterbacks. And then this is against the grain, honestly, but there are times where I'd like to diversify my portfolio and sometimes draft even with a hero quarterback, like a last round quarterback, just to have a third QB stack. It can protect you with injuries during the season to get you into playoffs. And then it can, help you with playoffs, getting you through. You'd have 3 stacks to kind of, ping pong you through. Because let's be honest, even the best quarterbacks don't always hit their ceiling every week. So again, that's the kind of like position capital though that you want to keep in mind. A lot of people, if they draft a quarterback high, will only draft 2. I do that some, and then sometimes I draft 3 just to kind of as a way to be different and have different exposures. And then tight end, again, it's usually the way I play it is if I get Kelsey or Mark Andrews, maybe Kittle, Hawkinson, I only draft 2. Once I start going down the board, then I'm drafting 3 tight ends. Now, same thing goes, you'll hear different terminology for different other lineup construction strategies, like 0 running back, hero running back, double hero running back, hyper fragile. Hyper fragile is basically, or robust is basically, you just draft running backs at the top and then you kind of ignore it later. You definitely, in that case, hyper fragile, you're only drafting 4 running backs, but you're drafting them within like the first 5 rounds. Robust, I believe you're drafting 3 or 4 running backs in the first 5 rounds and maybe 1 later. Those are extreme strategies. Another extreme strategy is 0 RB, which is very popular. It had a very high success advance rate last year. 0 RB, that is. And that's where you don't draft a running back till like rounds 5 or 6 usually. Some people push it further than that. I usually like to draft my first running back by round 5 or 6, even in 0 RB builds. And that allows you to really address the receiver and or like a hero quarterback tight end position early. So those are the kind of more extreme builds. But again, in a situation, if you're drafting a 0 RB, opposite of hyper fragile or robust RB, you would want to then draft more running backs. You probably would at least want 6 running backs if you did 0 RB. If your first running back wasn't until round 5 or 6 or 7, then you definitely want to draft 6 running backs because your quality isn't as high. So you want to make sure the quantity is there. Again, same thing. So then hero RB is you're drafting 1 running back early, and then you're kind of waiting till like rounds, 6, 7, 8 later and addressing going back to the running back position. I like that because it's kind of a blend of the more extreme strategies. I can get a Nick Chubb in round 2 and then readdress the position in round, let's say 7, and with like a, Damian Pierce or Miles Sanders. And then I can still really then hammer the quarterback and receiver position with those other picks. And then of course after. So I like that. Then there's the double hero running back, which means you're drafting 2 running backs in the top 3 rounds. But then if you're doing that, then you definitely only need 5 running backs total. And you definitely don't draft your 3rd running back until probably like round 9, 10, somewhere around there, because you've essentially got your 2 starting running backs locked down. So these are the different strategies you're going to hear. I know it's complex. It's a lot to take in, but it's something that needs to be considered as you advance through best ball. And you can't go in to a particular draft saying, I'm going to do 0 RB, or I'm going to do, hero QB, or I'm going to do double hero running back. You have to let the draft come to you. And then once you see how it's, what your first pick, what your pick you're given, because obviously when you enter a draft, you don't know what pick you're going to get until it's assigned to you. Then it's assigned to you. And then obviously once you make that first pick and you see the board shaking out the way it is, that's when you kind of start formulating in your head what you want to do. So these are all things to keep in mind, but it's important to know the different strategies, know how to do them correctly. And we'll have a lot more shows on the Fanspeak Network and on fanspeak.com about deep diving strategies. Again, these Best Ball 102, 101, 102, 103 are all about like learning best ball. for deeper strategies, listen to our strategy shows, listen to our live drafts, read our articles on fanspeak.com, and we will cover this much, much further. The last thing I want to cover is ADP. That means average draft position. You'll hear a lot of people talk about that in the best ball landscape. And ADP is another strategy to keep in mind. You want to try to get good value on your picks. If you see a guy falling, past his ADP, maybe there's a reason for it, maybe not. Last year in August, Josh Jacobs' ADP plummeted because of reports, and you'll see this a lot now that once the summer and camp reports happen, because camp reports, and preseason reports were that he played in the Hall of Fame game. They must not value him. Maybe Zamir White will have a role, and his ADP plummeted. Well, people who didn't overreact to that and still grabbed him with a plummeting ADP were the ones that won in that. So, you have to use that to your benefit sometimes. You don't want to reach too far past player's ADP unless it's really to accomplish like a correlation or stack, and you never want to go overboard with it. So you kind of want to be close to the ADP range. And then when you can get values. One of the reasons we draft early is to sometimes get closing ADP line value, which means, I make a stand on it, let's say in Ezekiel Elliott now in pick 170 or whatever he's going now, he lands on a team in a good situation where he could have a lot of the, goal line work. He might jump up all the way to the 140s or something. And I'm getting, 38 picks of ADP value. That's the kind of stuff you'll hear too. ADP value is something to keep in mind. Again, it's not like gospel. It's not like you can't draft a guy ahead of ADP. It's just something to keep in mind. And let's be honest, player takes are important too. How you feel about a player. There are players that I don't agree with their ADP. And so I just don't take them or I let them fall. There are players that I am willing to reach for a little bit because my personal rankings are higher than their ADP. So it's all kind of a balance with that too. Everything in best ball is kind of a balance. You don't kind of want to overdo any one strategy, but you want to be smart about all strategies. You want to, pay attention to bye weeks. You want to pay attention to your roster construction. You want to pay attention to correlating and stacking with your quarterback and stacking good teams. You want to pay attention to that ADP. These are all things to keep in mind. And I think I've hit you with enough for Best Ball 102 because we will kind of finalize it all with Best Ball 103 and our final part of the Best Ball series in the next week or two. But we hope this has been helpful for you. Again, if you're new to Underdog or drafters, be sure to use code Fanspeak for 100% deposit bonus. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, check out Best Ball 102. Hopefully you enjoyed Best Ball 103 and Best Ball 102. And Best Ball 103 will be coming to you soon. And check out all our content on fanspeak.com and the Fanspeak Network. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.